What is the state of America's health?
Well, the state of America's health is very mixed. There are quite a number of people who are embracing better health. They're eating healthier diets, and you can see the evidence every time you go into the grocery store. There are more vegetarian and vegan options than ever. The dairy case is hardly a dairy case anymore because there's soy milk and rice milk and almond milk and oat milk. Everything is out there. And so there are a lot of people who are really embracing health, and they're putting it to work for themselves. That said, there is a far greater number of people who are still struggling with obesity and diabetes and heart disease and cancer. And in some ways, we're losing that battle because these conditions are hitting us earlier and earlier in life. Diabetes, instead of arriving at 40, arrives at 14. We've got our work cut out for us.
You wrote a book called Your Body in Balance, The New Science of Food, Hormones, and Health. What was it about, and why did you write it?
We had discovered that we can really elevate our approach to nutrition. The old approach, if I can put it that way, is you eat bad foods and you get excess weight, or you get a high cholesterol, you get a heart attack. But the slightly more complex approach is that everything in your body is regulated by hormones. Hormones control so much of human physiology. And the news is that we can control our hormones based on what we eat. I'm talking about thyroid hormone. Your thyroid is at the base of your neck. It gives energy to your body. And your thyroid depends in large part on what you eat. Nobody knows that. They don't know how to use it. So every day of their life, they're feeling sluggish and out of sorts. But it's a pretty easy matter to choose foods to get your thyroid working right. Insulin is another hormone, which regulates blood sugar, unlike thyroid hormone, which regulates body energy. And you can get your insulin working better based on what you eat. And you have estrogen and testosterone and so many hormones. And Your Body in Balance is a book that I wrote to be kind of an owner's manual to show you how to fix up each of the hormones in your body where foods can play a role. And for me, it was a revelation, and I wanted to share it.
Do you recommend bariatric surgery?
In the clinic that we run, we don't do bariatric surgery or recommend it, but we do have colleagues who do bariatric surgery. That said, it's important to recognize that overweight comes from eating habits, maladaptive eating habits, which can be a mixture of a whole variety. There are many, many reasons why these can occur. But when we can get our eating habits in better, on track better, bariatric surgery is very rarely something you would even consider. But there are people who make a case for people who are in an extremely tough spot, where nothing they have done has really worked, and they have found good results from bariatric surgery. But it is never a decision to be taken lightly. It has a certain mortality, and it has a lot of unpleasant long-term effects that go along with it. So bariatric surgeons all know this, and they counsel patients very carefully before going in this direction. Let me also say that having bariatric surgery does not mean that you don't have to follow a healthier diet, because if you don't, all that weight comes back, and despite the fact that you've had surgery, you can have a really terrible result. So the best thing, obviously, is to follow a healthy, completely plant-based diet years before the bariatric surgery decision would ever be made, and hopefully you will never need it.
Is there a way to stop cancer from spreading if you have it, and stop it from coming back for people in remission?
Researchers have focused on certain kinds of cancer, looking at survival. Probably the best known is the category of hormone-related cancers. Here I'm speaking of breast cancer and prostate cancer. And researchers have found really very clearly that if a woman has previously been diagnosed with breast cancer, and she's concerned, will the cancer come back? Could the cancer come back, and could it kill her? There are certain things that do seem to help. One is reducing fatty foods. One is greatly boosting vegetables and fruits, along with a lot of good physical exercise. Lacing up your sneakers seems to be a good idea. avoiding dairy, particularly high-fat dairy, seems to be important in this regard as well. The mortality figures for women who have had cancer in the past and who are continuing to consume high-fat dairy are really just frightening. And I don't know if that's because of the estrogens in the dairy. That's probably the explanation, but it could be other things too. For men, Dr. Dean Ornish, who is really a great genius, after showing that heart disease was reversible, then did a really important study in men who already had prostate cancer, showing that their course after diagnosis could be really dramatically affected based on what they eat. And the themes are pretty clear. Get the animals off your plate, get them off completely. Don't follow a Mediterranean diet or a lacto-ovo diet. Get rid of the animal products. Vegan diet, plant-based diet. Keep oils really low. Eat natural, healthy foods, vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans. Don't forget your vitamin B12 supplement and that kind of thing. But that's the general area with regard to nutrition. And of course, you do want to add exercise as appropriate. Try to handle stress in your life in some way other than drinking, smoking, doing unhealthy things. Put those things together. You got a pretty good regimen.
What should a man or woman do if a mammogram, MRI, or other diagnostic test finds something in their body that could be malignant? Should they biopsy it? Should they remove it? Should they treat it with mainstream protocols? Should they consider alternative protocols?
The answer is, in my view, number one, you got to have good medical care. And so if you don't get a particularly good diagnosis or a satisfactory information from your first doctor, get another one, get a third opinion if you need it. But there's really no substitute for a good diagnosis and good medical planning. That's really important. Secondly, there's nothing wrong with also considering what used to be called alternative medicine. But I'm happy to tell you that with regard to nutrition, it used to be thought of as alternative. It's now an integral part of mainstream medicine. So if a person, let's say a woman has a breast lump and she talks with her doctor and she and her doctor are going to speak together about what needs to be done. Is a biopsy appropriate or not? If so, when and what do you do? Is excision the way to go or not? In addition to all of those discussions, it is absolutely appropriate to follow as healthy as possible a diet. And that should be begun at diagnosis, hopefully before diagnosis. And there is never a time when a healthy diet is not part of the regimen.
In your book, The Cheese Trap, How Breaking a Surprising Addiction Will Help You Lose Weight, Gain Energy, and Get Healthy, you wrote a chapter called Heart Disease, Diabetes, and the French Paradox. Please explain what you meant.
There was an observation decades ago that people in France seemed to have less heart attacks than people in Britain. And the thought was the French are eating creamy sauces and so forth, and they should be having more heart attacks, but they were having fewer heart attacks. Maybe the credit went to the red wine that they were drinking. And it's true. And, at the time, the French were drinking a lot of red wine, which I think probably accounted for why they liked Jerry Lewis movies so much. But with regard to what the effects on health, the French paradox, as it was called, was not exactly accurate. Part of it was down to diagnosis. If a person in Britain died suddenly without warning, it was called sudden death. If that same person died without warning in France, it was a cardiac death. Even if in both cases it was a heart attack, they were diagnosed differently. So that skewed the numbers a little bit. Smoking was also dramatically different between the two groups. Women in Britain were more likely to smoke, women in France less likely. So there were a number of other things. But nonetheless, I mean, there's something to be said for this. The key, though, is not that creamy sauces are healthy or that charcuterie is somehow a good idea. Hunks of pig flesh are not good for anybody. But until most people have kind of forgotten that countries used to have regional diets. In the south of France, the chefs would sometimes kind of make fun of chefs from the north of France, particularly northeastern France. They would say, here in the south, down in Nice, I'm not cooking with heavy cream. I'm using olive oil. And what has happened in recent decades is that countries have become much more homogeneous. So that you'll see creamy stuff and cheese in the south of France where you wouldn't have seen it before. And that's happening in the US and everywhere. I mean, in the United States, there's a Denny's in every city and town. And that has led people to somehow imagine that healthy, better health that might have been attributable to, say, a Southern French kind of diet might, I think the credit for it might have been misappropriated a little bit.
In your book, The Cheese Trap, How Breaking a Surprising Addiction Will Help You Lose Weight, Gain Energy, and Get Healthy, you wrote a chapter called Hidden Hormone Effects. Please explain what you meant.
Yeah, cows make estrogens, and the estrogens get into the milk and they get into your body. They're only traces, but it's enough to affect body chemistry. And what many people may not realize is that cows are pregnant. They're impregnated every year. And I have to say, if you really think a glass of milk is what you want to drink, you ought to go and see where it came from. Because the way you make milk is surprisingly unsavory. You have an underpaid guy who works on the farm, and he takes a glove and he puts it on his left arm right up to his shoulder, and he sticks it in the anus of the cow, right up to about his elbow. And through the rectal wall, he can feel the cow's uterus, and he grabs the uterus and holds it still. And then with his right hand, he takes what looks like a knitting needle and jams it into her cervix and injects semen. And the semen came from a bull. Now, these animals are not volunteers, but she will not object because she's chained by the neck, and she's going to be pregnant now. And if she had been milked before, they're going to continue to milk her during her pregnancy. Now, when she's pregnant, she's putting out more estrogen, more progesterone that gets into the milk, and you drink it. And of course, anybody who has a heart for animals is revolted by not just that process, but by what happens 9 months after the impregnation, is that her baby is born, and right in front of her, the baby is taken away and in a wheelbarrow, and the male calves are slaughtered fairly promptly for veal, and the females are raised in isolation until they're old enough to have somebody's hand up their backside. And by about age 4, all of the cows are killed anyway, virtually all of them, because their milk production slacks off. So their normal lifespan of about 20 is cut short. Anyway, the reason I mention these kind of grotesque parts of the industry is there are a lot of people who won't eat meat because it means killing an animal, but all the dairy cows are killed. They just are made miserable for year after year before they're killed. But along the way, because of this repeated artificial insemination, they're pregnant, and the pregnant animals make estrogens, and the estrogens get into the milk and they increase your risk of breast cancer, according to the best research that we have. Now, we do need more research here, but they seem to have lots and lots of effects. So dairy does other things that disrupt our hormonal metabolism. It disrupts male metabolism, such that prostate cancer is much more common in milk drinkers than non-milk drinkers. So milk is something that nature designed for a calf, and the calf's supposed to drink it. And then the calf is old enough to be weaned. The calf doesn't need it anymore. And we don't need to take milk from a cow, and we're better off without it.
In your book, The Cheese Trap, How Breaking a Surprising Addiction Will Help You Lose Weight, Gain Energy, and Get Healthy, you wrote a chapter called How Cheese Keeps You Hooked. Please explain what you meant.
The dairy protein has integrated into the protein molecule opiate chemicals called casomorphins. The name comes from casein, C-A-S-E-I-N, and casein-derived morphine-like compounds, casomorphins, are in the protein. And so when you drink a glass of milk or eat some cheese, the protein breaks apart and the casomorphins will go to your brain, and they attach to the very same mu receptors that heroin attaches to. Now, they're not as strong. The brain binding power for the four carbon casomorphin, or 4 amino acid casomorphin called morphoceptin, it's about 1/10 that of pharmacy grade morphine. So it's not enough to get you arrested, but strong enough to make you hooked. And these are, because they're in the protein, the higher protein dairy foods, like particularly cheese, are very concentrated in casomorphins, and which is why cheese is more addictive than, say, a glass of milk.
What can you do to prevent dementia, Alzheimer's, and memory loss?
One thing is get new parents. Part of it is genetic. There is a gene called the ApoE epsilon 4 allele, and if both of your parents had it and gave it to you, your risk is multiplied by 10 or 15 fold. So genetics plays a role, but that's the bad news. The good news is that despite genetic increased risk, diet and exercise do seem to play a huge role. And part of the reason we know that is there have been many observational studies that have looked at diet patterns. One of the really influential ones was called the Chicago Health and Aging Project, where they showed that people eating the most saturated fat, which is dairy fat and meat fat, had about 2 to 3 times higher Alzheimer's risk compared to other people. So check that box, avoid the dairy fat and the meat fat. Trans fats also, the partially hydrogenated oils used in cupcakes, donuts, that, the old fryer grease that used to be hydrogenated fats, and there's still some of that around, that increases risk in the same way. So getting away from animal products is a good idea. There is some evidence that diets rich in vegetables and fruits can be helpful. Vitamin E rich foods, nuts and seeds, can be helpful. You don't want to overdo it on them because they're really fatty, but even an ounce a day of nuts could be helpful. Lacing up your sneakers in research at the University of Illinois appears to actually reverse brain shrinkage, particularly in the hippocampus, which is the center of memory. So putting it all together, plant-based diet, don't overdo it on alcohol, but some studies have suggested there's maybe some benefit for mild drinking. It's not a reason to start. Getting regular exercise, making sure you get adequate sleep every night. Those things do seem to really, really help.
Is depression mental, physical, or both? And can you affect mood and depression with diet and lifestyle?
I think it's both. It is certainly physical, because we learned decades ago that there were certain medications, particularly antihypertensive medications, that could predictably cause depression. You would have a person who was under no new stress, nothing had happened in their life, but they started the pill, and within a relatively short period of time, the bottom just fell out. And researchers have discovered that it's because the neurotransmitters that regulate mood happen to be very similar to the neurotransmitters that regulate your blood pressure. And if you turn them off, your mood can cascade downhill really rapidly. So the physical aspects of mood, I think, are underappreciated. And they can be affected by everyday things. Alcohol is a downer. So people who drink day after day will have more depression. Caffeine is an upper, but it sort of uses up your feel-good chemicals, so to speak, so that the next day you're in caffeine withdrawal and your mood is worse than it would be if you weren't using caffeine at all. Exercise is an antidepressant. And even with people who have a diagnosis of depression, if they exercise on a regular basis, it does have an antidepressant effect. And best of all is to exercise with other people, because being around other people helps. But even if you're exercising all by yourself in your apartment on a treadmill, it still works. It still has a good effect. Lastly, we did a study with Geico, the car insurance company, where we used plant-based diets at work. And we used them to help diabetes and weight problems. But we discovered that mood improved, depression lessened, anxiety lessened. And other researchers have found much the same thing with plant-based diets. So take depression seriously. I mean, suicide is a real risk. And so you don't want to fool around with this. But in addition to whatever other treatments you may be getting, there's every reason to use good, vigorous, heart-pumping exercise to the extent that you can safely do it, and follow a completely low-fat, plant-based diet. Don't forget your B12, because your brain needs that too.
Do we need to supplement to get enough DHA or omega-3 oils?
Probably not, but I think it's a legitimate question. Your body has all the enzymes that are required to make DHA. DHA, which is a 22-carbon omega-3 fat that the brain needs, and it has other roles in the body too. And it's built from alpha-linolenic acid, which is in many, many plants. If you send some broccoli to a laboratory, they'll tell you don't have a lot of fat in it, but a surprising portion of it is omega-3, a proportion of the fat that's in there. And so if you eat lots and lots of these things, you'll get traces of the omega-3s that your body can, through the enzymes it has, lengthen from 18 carbons to 20 carbons to 22. Problem is that lengthening process is slow, and it's made slower if you're eating lots of other fats that occupy those enzymes and take their attention away from the fats you're trying to lengthen. So with that in mind, there are some people who supplement, and I wouldn't necessarily tell them not to. There are potentially some risks. Prostate cancer does seem to be higher in men who are taking or who have higher blood levels of DHA. Nobody knows, or at least I do not know why that is. We have seen this consistently enough that it appears to be a real effect, but we don't know the mechanism for it. The argument for supplementation is there's some suggestion that people who have low levels of DHA are at higher risk for Alzheimer's. And so what some people will do is they'll get tested. They'll use a company like Omega Quant, and you put a drop of blood on a little card and you send it to them, and they'll tell you what your DHA blood level is, and then you can supplement and see if it changes. So stay tuned. I think we need more research to really sort these things out.
What about eggs? Are they healthy? What about egg whites?
Yeah, the egg has two unhealthy parts, the yolk and the white. The yolk is the source of cholesterol, has more cholesterol than any other food. And it also has a significant amount of saturated fat in it that you have no biological use for, but will raise your cholesterol and contribute to heart disease. The egg white is just a big glob of animal protein, and nobody needs that. I mean, you'll get plenty of protein without animal protein. There has been an ongoing controversy fueled by the egg industry itself, which has tried to assert that you can eat all that cholesterol in an egg, but it won't affect your cholesterol, which is not true. It is quite clear that egg ingestion, although the effects vary a lot, overall it does augment your blood cholesterol level. Not as bad as animal fat, but the good thing is that animal products are the sources of both cholesterol and animal fat. And if you avoid animal products, you don't have to worry about it. You're skipping them both.
From a health standpoint, should we try to add oils such as flax, hemp, and olive oil to our diets, or should we try to avoid it? And if we do use it, should we avoid heating it?
You mean you cook with it, but you try not to douse it all over your food? I would not add oils, generally speaking, as a general rule. Because keep in mind, people think about, say, sugar extracted from sugar cane as a refined product. Well, oil is like that too. I mean, there's no faucet on an olive tree. You're taking 10,000 olives and discarding all the pulp and all the fiber and all the nutrients in the olives, and you're just using the oil as a concentrated product that nature never had in mind for you. And you can call it virgin and other, attractive names and so forth, but it's still, in my view, what I would call a refined product. The health issue about olive oil is it's way better than chicken fat. That's for sure. Chicken fat is about 30% saturated fat. That's the bad one. For olive oil, it's about 14. That's better. But cooking with a nonstick pan with no fat at all is 0 saturated fat. So that's better still. And all fats, including olive oil, have 9 calories hiding in every single gram. So a person following a Mediterranean diet, slathering oil all over everything, is going to have a real hard time losing weight. So olive oil, better than animal fat by far, but you're going to do much better by minimizing these oils. One thing I would say, though, flax oil, when people use it, they're not using it really as a food, they're using it as a medicine. And if you want to use it for that, I'm not going to argue with you.
From a health standpoint, should we try to add raw seeds, raw nuts, avocados, and olives themselves to our diet?
No, I don't think you need to. You're looking for healthy fats, but the alpha-linolenic acid that you're looking for is really widespread. And my favorite source is the green leafy vegetables. They don't have a lot of fat, but what they have is very high in ALA.
What foods increase fertility for those that are trying to get pregnant? And does this apply to both men and women?
Yes. First of all, let me say I'm not cheerleading for fertility. I think we have more than enough of it. But I know that many couples are eager to add another human being to the planet. And for those folks, it's good for them to realize that fertility is impaired by dairy products. It appears to be in studies in fertility clinics, men have lower sperm counts and worse sperm morphology and motility if they're big cheese eaters. So dairy is an issue. For women, it really does pay to follow a completely plant-based diet and to get away from the added oils. That's a good way to tackle things like endometriosis, ovulatory unpredictability, and as well as PCOS. So I wrote a whole couple of chapters on that in Your Body in Balance, and I'm happy to say that people have really found it useful.
What should men do to keep their prostates healthy?
Avoid dairy for sure. When you mix prostate cancer cells with IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor, they grow like crazy, and the best way to get your IGF-1 level up is to have dairy products. You don't want to go anywhere near that. So avoiding dairy is important. Secondly, think about the things that you want to bring into your diet. Tomatoes, surprisingly enough, have figured big in the prostate cancer prevention literature. It's because that red lycopene color seems to help prevent prostate cancer. And it's also in watermelons and pink grapefruit.
Are all fruits healthy? Are some too sugary due to hybridization and not being native to our area, such as pineapples, mangoes, seedless grapes, bananas?
I think overall, I'm going to give a green light to all of them. It is true that different fruits have evolved in certain regions. I know the tomato is a North American fruit. It wasn't there when our species was evolving in Africa. But that said, if you look at the nutrition in a fruit, it's very high in fiber. It's high in very healthful carbohydrate. And although the natural sugars make it sweet, if you actually test how rapidly those sugars enter your bloodstream and affect your blood sugar, they are extremely gentle on your blood sugar. So I'm going to give a green light to fruits of all varieties. Now, I have to say, I always encourage people to pick organic if at all possible. But fruit is really a great way to go.
What do you recommend for someone who has gastrointestinal disease?
If a person has gastrointestinal disease, there are lots of them. Where do we start? Maybe we should probably start with a trip to the drugstore, where if you look at the shelves, you see shelf after shelf after shelf of fiber supplements and constipation aids, that kind of thing. When you get away from animal products and you get into a plant-based diet, a completely vegan diet, constipation for most people is never an issue at all. And that's for two reasons. One is plants have fiber, and fiber really moves things along. Animal products have no fiber. The other thing is that cheese has those casomorphins in it that I mentioned earlier. They're opiates. Opiates slow down the digestive tract. And there is probably nothing more constipating than a big hunk of cheese. So if we go to a plant-based diet, we're going to do much better there. There are other digestive concerns, probably of greatest concern, something like colorectal cancer. And a plant-based diet is your best friend there too.
What is gluten? Who should avoid it? If you keep eating it, will you end up with celiac disease? Should we avoid wheat, oats, and barley since they have gluten? Are all other whole grains like quinoa, millet, amaranth, teff, buckwheat, and wild rice safe for a celiac patient?
Okay. Gluten is a protein. It's found in wheat. It's also found in barley and rye. And wheat and barley and rye are healthy foods. And they're great and delicious, and you really can't say anything bad about them. But in the same way as you can be allergic to a strawberry, or you can be allergic to oranges or whatever, you can have a reaction to gluten. Less than 1% of people has the disease called celiac disease, which is where you're reacting to the protein, the gluten in wheat or barley or rye. And if you've got that, your intestine really gets torn up, and you have to avoid gluten-containing grains. The good news is it's really those three that I mentioned. Oats don't have gluten. Corn does not have gluten, unless they're in a cereal box factory where they're contaminated by other grains. So there are companies like Bob's Red Mill that make a point of saying, our oats definitely don't have any gluten contaminating, and so you can trust ours. Now, so I said about less than 1% of people have celiac disease. A larger number, maybe roughly 1 in 10, will just say if they avoid gluten, they feel better. And by feel better, they mean their digestion is better, or their mentation is better. They just feel better. And they don't have to avoid gluten, but they can, and they do well. The other 90% of people will try a gluten-free diet because they heard about it on TV. And they discovered it was a pain in the neck, really difficult, and didn't help them at all. And when they went back to eating gluten-containing grains, they were perfectly fine with it. So that's really where they are. Very, very few people need to avoid gluten, but there are, as I said, people with celiac disease who absolutely must. And then if you wish to avoid gluten, you can. And some of the gluten-free products that have come out, like a pizza that has a rice crust, for example, because rice doesn't have gluten. It's a cool variant on a pizza. Give it a try, see if you like it.
Should people take a probiotic to help their gut microbiome?
No, it's not necessary. It's fashionable. Industry promotes it. The research on efficacy has really shown that they don't help. Even for a person who has had an antibiotic treatment that knocked out their gut bacteria, it will repopulate on its own. You don't need probiotics. What you do need is a healthy diet for bacteria to flourish in. If you're not eating healthy, high fiber vegetables and fruits and whole grains and beans, unhealthy bacteria are going to flourish in your gut. So a healthy diet is what allows good, healthy gut bacteria to grow.
How do we solve America's healthcare crisis?
First of all, we have to want to. And it's been a little surprising to me that insurance companies, who you would think would do really well if nobody ever got sick, if nobody ever charged anything to their insurance, they would be making a whole lot of money. But I found that insurance companies don't particularly care if people are healthy or not. Because if they're unhealthy and they're using lots of medical care, the insurance companies just raise their premiums to compensate for it. So they make the same amount of money, whether you're healthy or not, whether you're sick or not. And they're making plenty of money. Most physicians, I am sorry to say, while they want their patients to be healthy, they're not doing what is really the fundamental thing that brings health and keeps the patient out of your office. And that's to make sure that their diet and lifestyle are conducive to health. Doctors to this day are not very well trained in nutrition. They bring their prejudices with them to medical school, and they carry them with them in practice. They don't have a dietitian who works there to counsel patients. And if they do, the dietitian probably has the same prejudices the doctor does. And so we're really not getting where we need to go. At the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, we have been working to change all of these things. And we have found that through our annual conferences and our continuing medical education programs, that there is a new generation of doctors that has embraced healthy diets in a big way. And they're using it in practice, and they're encouraging their hospitals to throw out the bacon and to serve healthy foods. And when we got started back 35 years ago, there weren't very many doctors like that, but today there are thousands and thousands and thousands. And at our medical center, Barnard Medical Center, we have been able to also take advantage of telemedicine. So we're reaching people, not just in Washington, D.C., where we are, but in New York and in Florida and California and in Texas. And we have found that not only is the medical profession starting to turn a good corner, but the public is extremely eager to become partners in their healthcare. And that means learning, how can I eat healthfully? Can I maybe even get off some medications instead of adding medications? And that's been very exciting too.
How do you maintain healthy nerves, eyes, and kidneys?
I think you want to do a couple of things. One is to recognize what threatens them. One of the big threats of all three of those organ systems is diabetes. And if you have a chronically elevated blood sugar, It's going to threaten your vision. It's going to threaten your nerves, particularly in your feet, and it'll threaten the survival of your kidneys. It threatens a lot more than that. It'll threaten your life. A long time ago, though, back in 2003, the National Institutes of Health gave us a grant to try to improve on diabetes diets. And so we compared a classic conventional diet, reducing calories, limiting carbohydrate, that kind of thing. We compared that to a completely vegan diet, plant-based diet, no animal products, kept oils low, and chose the healthiest plant-based foods. And there was just no contest. The vegan diet was 3 times better at reducing blood sugar. And we now know why. And in fact, let me describe this in just 30 seconds. This is going to be the most important thing I'm going to say in this whole interview. Elevated blood sugar comes from the fact that your muscle and liver cells are filled with fat. Let me be clear about that. Fat from a hot dog that you ate or a cheese sandwich that you ate. The fat goes through your bloodstream into your muscle cells and into your liver cells. And as the fat builds up, then insulin, which is coming from the pancreas and arriving at the surface of the cell, and that insulin is trying to open the cell to let sugar in. With that fat buildup, the insulin can't work normally. That's insulin resistance. So up until now, a lot of people have naively thought the answer to keeping your blood sugar down is just don't eat sugar, don't eat fruit, don't eat carbohydrate. That's ridiculous. That's wrong. That's not the physiology. The physiology is to get the fat out of your muscle cells, get the fat out of your liver cells so that your natural insulin can work again. And it does. And we have proved this by actually scanning people's livers and muscle cells before and after following a very low-fat vegan diet. You can show that you can get the fat out of their cells to a great degree. It comes dribbling out, it's metabolized out, and their blood sugars will fall and their ability to handle sugar improves. So what does that do? That means it protects your eyes, and it protects your kidneys, and it protects your nerves.
For women going through menopause, should they consider bioidentical hormone therapy?
No, they should reject bioidentical hormone therapy and all hormone therapy unless there is something that is between them and their doctor that I have completely missed. Adding hormones, menopause is not a fluke of nature. Menopause is something that nature designed so that when women are about 50 or 51 or 52, this is not a time when you need a toddler on your kitchen floor. You've got other things to do. You got to care for the kids you already have. You might want to be dedicating yourself to work or to other things in life. The fertility window is limited. There's menarche and there's menopause. And the idea, well, I'm going to pretend to be fertile into my 80s by taking these hormones and so forth. That's a real mistake. What does it do? It increases the risk of breast cancer. It increases the risk of all kinds of other health issues. So skip that. And just because they're called bioidentical does not mean they're safe. Your own hormones will cause breast cancer if they are continuing wave after wave after wave after wave. That's what menopause is all about, to say we're going to stop that. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't all kinds of issues. There are hot flashes that will be absolutely cured by administering hormones. But there are other ways, there are better ways to cure them. And if a woman is having hot flashes now, try this. No animal products. Keep oils extremely low to a bare minimum. And have about a half a cup of cooked soybeans every day. You take whole soybeans, put them in your Instant Pot, have a half a cup every day. And just see if your hot flashes don't get much better. If you have sexual symptoms, vaginal dryness, that's common, but don't take an oral medication for that. Use just a local cream, something that's where the absorption is dramatically less, and that'll help.
What foods fight moodiness and stress?
A couple of things. I mentioned earlier that we had and others had found that plant-based diets along with exercise were antidepressants. And also they seem to help against anxiety. We don't know exactly why that is, but a number of studies have seemed to suggest that that's the case. A couple of other things, though. One obvious thing is be careful about caffeine, because caffeine it has the effects that you're already aware of if you've tried it. But one other thing, if a woman has PMS, or if a man or woman has moody spells, or there are times where you just feel not yourself. Try this. Take a couple of days and grill up for breakfast some tempeh or some tofu. And I guess everyone knows about tofu, but you may not know about tempeh, T-E-M-P-E-H. It's fermented soybeans. They sell it in a block at the health food store right next to the tofu. And just cut it into little kind of sort of like a pack of cards, or maybe half the thickness of a pack of cards. Marinate it in soy sauce and grill it in a nonstick pan. It's roughly bacony kind of, and have some of that every day. Richard Wortman at MIT taught me this, or he taught me the mechanism, which is a protein load in the morning, and it's going to be plant protein, so there's no animal fat in it, there's no cholesterol, nothing like that, but it's a protein load that precedes carbohydrates that you get later, like toast that you might have with it. The protein load blocks serotonin production, and that way tiredness and fatigue seem to melt away, and your mood will be more stable. Where a typical case would be, I've been having organic orange juice every day and for breakfast, and that's my whole thing, but I'm not really feeling very good in the afternoon. I'm feeling moody and crabby and stuff like that and down. Try this for a couple of days. Try my little tempeh or tofu trick. Have that as the first thing that you eat in the morning, and see if your mood isn't a little bit better. Do not do this with animal protein, but with plant protein, it's a good idea.
How do you prevent getting multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, or ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease?
With Lou Gehrig's disease, I think I really just don't think we have the research yet to know what a person can do. But with regard to MS, to a lesser extent, I guess with Parkinson's also the research has not trudged along as fast as it needs to. But with MS, let me say, multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune condition where the body is attacking the nerves, and particularly nerve transmission is attacked and is impaired. And researchers have discovered that, surprisingly, there are people who have changed their diets to exactly the kind of diet that we've been talking about for diabetes or for hormonal issues, and they have found that MS in some cases just remits. And Saray Stancic, S-T-A-N-C-I-C, is a physician who has written a new book about this. She has a movie called Code Blue, where she describes, as a physician, being diagnosed with MS and being debilitated by it, but then changing her diet and recovering. And it's the most remarkable story ever. And there are many others who have done this. John McDougall has done great writing on this very same topic. So, and anybody, if you have MS now, or if you're a neurologist who's treating MS, we should always be using healthy, low-fat, plant-based diets. The effects, I think, are going to be quite variable from patient to patient, but there is never a case where it is contraindicated.
How do you prevent osteoporosis and broken bones?
Well, a couple things. I guess everybody knows about calcium, but you don't need dairy calcium because, frankly, cows don't make calcium. The calcium that ended up in milk came from grass. I hope you're not eating grass, but the human equivalent is kale or collards or broccoli or some other more palatable green leafy vegetable. Green leafy vegetables draw the calcium from the soil, gets in their leaves, and so you want to eat that. You need calcium, but you need more. You need vitamin D to absorb calcium, and nature's way of doing that is to put ultraviolet light from the sun, and the UV light hits your skin, and inside your skin, the vitamin D is formed, and that goes to your digestive tract and pulls the calcium from the foods that you've eaten right into your blood. But modern humans try to avoid UV light, and they stay indoors, or they live in New Jersey where it's cold right now, and so they're not getting any sunlight on their skin. So they probably want to take a vitamin D supplement. Something like 2,000 international units would be a pretty typical regimen. And give your bones a reason to live. You need to exercise. And even walking and running, you don't think of that as exactly weight-bearing exercise, but it is. It strains your hip joints, it strains your spine. Do some push-ups for your wrists because you don't want to snap a wrist. And that combination is a pretty good combination.
Is there anything negative about foods from cans or plastic? And how about the receipt paper at the grocery stores?
Um, yeah, this is something that I wrote about in Your Body in Balance. There are, in fact, chemicals in the lining of a can, and where this really became, um, where this kind of caught the headlines was with Progresso. Progresso soup is like a great soup and it's delicious, and it kind of looks like a step above other soups. Cans are a little bit bigger, sounds vaguely Italian. But researchers discovered that if you had Progresso vegetable soup, something called BPA, bisphenol A, would get into your blood and into your urine. And that's not so cool. So there are cans of soup that are BPA free, and they make the lining of the can without BPA, which is great. And Progresso too. Progresso has vowed to make this very same transition. I don't know if they've quite gotten there yet, but hopefully they have. Here's the problem. You go to the health food store, you get all your BPA-free cans, and you go to the cashier and you pay with your credit card. The cashier hands you the receipt, and you crumble it up and throw it out. What you didn't realize is that the paper was BPA coated and it goes through the skin. I'm talking about the paper on your credit card receipt, or the little paper that comes out of the ATM tickets, like plane tickets, and that sort of slick paper, that's BPA coated paper. How big of a risk is it? My hope is that it's not too huge of a risk, but it's there. It's a chemical that you don't want.
What can a woman do to help with cramps and premenstrual syndrome?
Oh, this is something we discovered just completely by accident. I was sitting at my desk back 20 some years ago, and a young woman called me up, and she had just debilitating cramps, which, many women have monthly menstrual cramps. But for about 1 in 10, it's bad enough that you're going to have trouble getting to work that day, without like a fistful of ibuprofen. So when this woman called for help, she wanted Demerol, which is a narcotic painkiller. And I said, well, I can give you a Demerol for a couple of days, but what are we going to do to stop this from happening next month? And I reasoned that we have seen research from the world of breast cancer that has given us some hints about how we might attack this condition. And let me just take a minute and describe it. Typical garden variety cramps come from the fact that the uterus, every single month, the uterus is the most optimistic organ in the body. Every month it thinks we're going to get pregnant. So what it does is the lining of the uterus thickens up. That's the endometrium. And it thickens up. And the more estrogen you have in your blood, the more it thickens up. And then at the end of the month, when the disappointed uterus finds out that we're not pregnant, that endometrial layer disintegrates. It just breaks up, and then it goes away in menstrual flow. Okay. So as it breaks up, it causes really bad cramping. It releases prostaglandins that cause cramps. So anyway, the more estrogen you have, the more that endometrial lining thickens up. And researchers in the cancer world had discovered that a really high fiber diet will bring down estrogen levels in women. And a high fat diet will bring up estrogen levels. So as this woman was calling me, it went through my mind. I thought, what's causing these darn cramps? What if we bring up the fiber, bring down the fat, and maybe next month you won't have so much endometrial thickening, maybe you'll feel better. So I said to her, let me give you Demerol for a couple of days. But do you want to try an experiment, low-fat vegan diet for a month? And she did, and it was an absolute cure for her. And we kept in touch, and she discovered that if she would even if she would stay vegan, but if she'd bring a little bit of fat back into it, she would really pay for it at the end of the month. So I did a study with Georgetown University where we did a randomized trial, and the diet works. So for anybody who's got cramps or who has PMS, like bloating and water retention or moodiness before your period, just give it a try. No animal products. Keep the oils scrupulously low. And people don't like to hear that because they think, well, I want some extra virgin olive oil and some nuts and guacamole. Those are delicious foods. They're going to work against you if you're trying. I'm sorry. I really wish guacamole was friendlier to your body than it is. But all these fatty foods are going to work against you. So vegan, keep those oils low, And try this for a couple of cycles, a couple of months, and you will be sold. It's just a really cool thing.
Should we try to add or avoid salt in our diet? How big a problem is salt? What health problems does it cause? And why do some people say we need salt?
Well, you do need salt. Sodium is a normal electrolyte that your body requires. It doesn't require anywhere near the amounts that we consume, but you need some. You do need salt. And plant foods don't have very much of it. So I do not object if a person has at the table has a salt shake and they put a little bit of salt on the surface of their food. The amount of sodium that they're adding is trivial, and for some people it improves palatability. Where we run into trouble with factories who take an innocent portion of green beans and put in enough salt to sink a ship, and then they seal up the can. A lot of canned foods are high in sodium. Now, some are marked low sodium, and that's good. Cheese is a huge offender. People know that potato chips are salty. There is more salt in 2 ounces of cheddar than there is in 2 ounces of potato chips. And if it's Velveeta, it's like 800 milligrams in 1 2-ounce serving. I'm not kidding. So cheese is, there's a million reasons to not eat cheese, but sodium is one of them.
What affects sex drive, and how do you keep it strong in your 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, or is that not realistic?
Well, it can be realistic, but it's not necessarily desirable. It's up to people if they really want to maintain a sex drive or not. It's very normal, particularly for women at around the time of menopause, to have a diminution in their sex drive, and they're okay with it. It's not a disease; it's not a disorder. People have tried to label it as such, and there's a doctor named Dr. Adrian Fuberman here in DC, who has done some terrific writing and speaking on it's a disorder if your husband thinks it's a disorder. But for you, you're perfectly fine to decide, look, factory's closed, I'm not making any more babies now. So I have to be one. I'm not really cheering for this culture of eternal youth where we want to bang like rabbits onto old age. There are other ways to spend your time. Don't get me wrong. If you want to, go for it. But I don't think it's something to be idealized. It's something that is a part of our reproductive years that heaven knows why it continues for as long as it does.
How much does sleep affect our health and our hormones? Is it really important?
Oh, yeah. Sleep affects us in many ways. If you don't sleep well, as I can say, I learned during my years of internship, when you're on call every third night, and you do not sleep at all during those nights, 2 things happen. One is your memory is impaired because your brain hasn't had the normal memory integration time during sleep is completely lost. The emotional integration time is also lost. During the early morning hours when you're dreaming, your body, your mind is integrating emotions. And if you don't have that time in sleep, you're going to be crabby the next day and your memory is going to be shot. You'll get through a day, but after 2 or 3 days, you're not going to be yourself at all. And you prop yourself up with caffeine. That's not the same as a good night's sleep. Worse, if you have not slept well, you will then eat anything just to get through the day. Your resolve to go running that day and to eat broccoli will be shot. And then all kinds of other problems arise as a result of that. So it's a good idea to get a good night's sleep. And for some of us, we have to force ourselves to really close that book. At 10 o'clock, do go to sleep. Be careful about alcohol, be careful about caffeine, because they will both disrupt sleep a little bit. Don't eat a lot of stuff in the evening, and you'll find that your sleep can be better. I do have a whole chapter on sleep in a book that I wrote called Power Foods for the Brain, and we talk about sleep in some detail because most people have a little trouble there.
How do you protect your thyroid?
2 things. First of all, your thyroid is at the base of your neck and it makes thyroid hormone, which gives you energy, as we were talking about earlier. your thyroid needs iodine. The element iodine is essential for making thyroid hormone. And there aren't a huge number of foods that have it. Nature's greatest source is sea vegetables. And so if we are a coastal people and we live in Japan, there's like sea vegetables all day long, seaweeds. But for me, growing up in Fargo, seaweed was something we never heard of. We did not have a seaweed salad. But I encourage people to have seaweed as part of to kind of learn about it. If you have a sushi roll, like not a fish sushi, but cucumber roll or asparagus roll, that nori that it's wrapped in, loaded with healthy iodine. Iodized salt is okay. Maybe even a third of a teaspoon of it will give you a start in the iodine that you need. So that's number one. Number two, we've been talking about plant-based diets and really cheerleading for them throughout this whole program. But the thyroid is another reason for it, because researchers have found that vegans have the least risk of hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism of any diet group. And the reason seems to be, we think, that the proteins in meat or dairy or maybe eggs trigger an autoimmune reaction that harms the thyroid. The disease is called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. That's the hypothyroidism, or Graves' disease, which is hyperthyroidism. They're both autoimmune conditions, and we believe they are triggered, at least in part, by dietary antigens, meaning animal proteins. So another good reason to avoid them. By the way, with this condition and all conditions, don't fire your doctor. Do take advantage of medical care. If you've got thyroid disease, you need to see an endocrinologist. You need to be diagnosed, and you may need treatment. And do not just assume that if you eat asparagus, you don't need medical care. You do. And it's important to be monitored and treated appropriately. Hopefully, a healthy diet will minimize your need for treatment, but you don't want to forego it.
Can type 2 diabetes be reversed? And if so, how?
Yeah. Back when I was a kid, we didn't think that was possible, but we started seeing this 20 some years ago in people who would come into our research trials, and they would adopt a healthy, completely plant-based diet, minimizing oils, and having healthy, low glycemic index foods like beans and vegetables and fruits. And their diabetes would improve, their need for medication would diminish, and in some cases, you would never know they ever had diabetes. It is the most amazing and beautiful thing to see, that diagnosis being erased from a patient's chart. The strategy is, because you're avoiding animal fat, because you're avoiding animal products, there's no animal fat in your diet. Because you're also keeping vegetable oils very low, there's not much of any kind of fat in your diet. So the fat inside your liver and muscle cells starts to dissipate. When that happens, your natural insulin can work again. And it can work to get the sugar into your cells. So get the fat out of your cells, that will let the sugar get out of your blood into your cells, and you got a shot at reversing diabetes.
Why was it important for you to come speak here at the Real Truth About Health conference?
There are so many people who are eager to improve their health. And yet at the same time, there are so many ways to change your diet, some of which are a whole lot better than others. And unfortunately, sometimes there's faddism involved, and sometimes wishful thinking. And industry is always dangling addictive foods in front of us. And so I wanted to be part of this program to hopefully share the results of the research that we have been doing, with the hope that people will, in turn, not only improve their own health, but most importantly, pass this information on to their loved ones, especially their kids, so that maybe their health will be better than their moms and dads ever could have been.
Well, with that, we want to thank you for all the meaningful work you do, and especially for joining us today. It's meant a lot to us and to our audiences. And thank you just very, very much for all you do. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Have a wonderful rest of the day and weekend, and we'll see you at the conference.
All right. Thanks a million.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye now.